is at 10 o'clock, but it is actually 10 o'clock. So we'll get started. Can I firstly say thank you so much for all of the fantastic people who've come here today to assist in this meeting. We've got the CAB, we've got Credit Union, we've got Norwich Credit Union, and we've got Norfolk Woolman Wise, and I hope I haven't missed anyone out. So thank you very much for taking the time, because that's hugely appreciated by members, and obviously we're discussing some important issues today. The way that this agenda will run, I will be moving item 8 to the end so that everyone who can get away will get away in case we end up having to go below the line on any aspect of that. You'll see that there's a below the line section at item 15, so we'll be combining those two. Without any further ado, I will start at item 1, which is the minutes of the last meeting. Do any members have any comments to make on those minutes? I see none. Are members happy that we accept them as a true record? Thank you very much. Those minutes are accepted. Item 2, apologies and substitutes. Ruth?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Eagle and Councillor Jeremy, and we've got Councillor Clark here as substitute for Councillor Jeremy.
Thank you. Item 3, Chairman's announcements. I have only one, which is that Norfolk County Council has made a minded to agreement to move forward with the Norfolk deal or devolution. I was offered an urgent item of business today where Norfolk County Council came to speak to us about how that is developing. I've declined that as I don't believe it is urgent, but I wanted to see members' views on having an item at the next meeting to find out what the County Council's up to and how that is progressing. Would members be happy that we investigate that? Clearly, we can talk about it under the work programme, but I wanted to bring it to members' attention. Thank you very much. Items of urgent business, item 4, there are none. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they want to bring to the committee's attention? I see none. Thank you very much. Item 6, I'm not aware of any non-members wishing to address the meeting under this item. As always, my policy is to allow hugely liberal speaking by members and non-members of this committee, and indeed today, anyone else who's come along to support this agenda. So I see no indications. Thank you very much. So item 7, fuel poverty and credit unions. Councillor Burt.
I have a point of order, Chairman.
Please.
So you only allow me to do this if I can actually point to the piece of legislation, which I'm doing. So that's the 1972 Local Government Act, Schedule 12, Part 1, Paragraph 4, which sets out what's required for an agenda or the distribution of the agendas. And it says 5 clear days before a meeting, specifies about where it needs to be published, but it says that it should specify the business proposed to be transacted. And at this stage, the business proposed was set to us by full council. It's 2 completely separate items sent to OSC from 2 different meetings. And I suggest there should be different items on the agenda. And furthermore, you'll know my interest in this because I'd asked you exactly what we were going to be discussing this time. And I asked that at the last meeting. But there is no officer's report in the pack, nor any reference to the motions which have been sent to overviewing and scrutiny by council. And despite the agenda being titled with the words fuel poverty, there is no mention of it at all. So this item, as listed, is not what we've been asked to do by full council. It appears to me that there is an agenda, but it's not the one that's printed in front of us.
Thank you for your point of order. So we're discussing fuel poverty and credit unions, which is as a result of 2 recommendations from full council of 2 motions, which will shortly be shown up on the screen. And I'll be inviting the proposer and Harry as the substitute for the other proposer, and then yourself and Councillor Land to speak as seconders of those original motions at the full council meeting. This is not a decision-making body. We have this item to discuss the recommendations. That's what we intend to do, and that is why we have a huge array of experts here today to speak to us on these matters, and they go right to the point of the motions that have been referred to us today. Clearly, we won't make a decision on these motions because this isn't a decision-making committee. All we can do is have a discussion about the issues that are raised in the motions, give our comments, and those minutes will be sent back to full council for consideration. I'll allow you one comeback and then I'm going to go on to the substantive business.
Chairman, we do make a decision. We make the decision as to whether to refer this back or not.
We're not a decision-making body insofar as we do not bind this council in any way. And so our recommendation will be back to full council. Full council, if it's so minded, will make a decision on behalf of this council. We are simply looking at the motions and the output of those motions. And that is today why we have this huge array of people to discuss it. So I'm gonna move on to the substantive motion, but thank you for your point. Ruth, if you wouldn't mind putting up the motion that was referred from full council on fuel poverty, and also if you're able to do both on the same screen, or alternatively we'll go one at a time. If we could do Rogers first, please. And sorry, for the members of the public present, just so you understand what's happening here in terms of a slightly arcane approach, perhaps. Full council, which is when all of the committee members of this council meet together, had a motion brought to it, one of which was proposed by Councillor Attewell, who's just there. The other was proposed by Councillor Jeremy, who wasn't able to be here today and has Councillor Clark as his substitute, and they were duly seconded by Councillor Land and Councillor Burt, just adjacent to Councillor Attewell. They came to full council considered those motions, and then the full council decision was to refer those motions to this committee for further discussion. So that is where this all came from, and the opportunity I'd like to afford to Councillor Attewell as the original proposer of that motion at full council is to speak to the motion, talk about particularly what he wants to get out of the discussion today, and then similarly we'll do it for the other motion, and hopefully we'll hear from Chris, his presentation, and then we'll move to some substantive debate and get some of your expert insights as appropriate. Is that all right, Roger? Are you happy to speak? Very good.
Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for turning up. I hadn't quite expected so many experts to come along, so that is very encouraging. If I may, Chairman, I think the best thing I can do is on the minutes of the council meeting held on the 6th of October, when I put forward the motion, there's just 2 paragraphs in there of what I said at that meeting, and I think it's probably helpful if I read those out again for the benefit of everybody here. So bear with me. Councillor Attewell explained that credit unions were financial cooperatives owned and ran by their members with a self-help ethos that enabled members to save and borrow money to suit their own personal budgets and circumstances. Credit unions offered straightforward saving accounts and loans to their members. Membership cost as little as £2 per year and included life insurance and loan protection. All members aged 18 and over were able to vote at the annual meeting on policy and other credit union matters and stand for election to any of the officer posts and receive an annual dividend payment. Credit unions were regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, the Prudential Regulation Authority, and belonged to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. The members' savings of up to £85,000 were safe. Credit unions encouraged people from all backgrounds and ages to save their money, and the various services they provided were explained. In this time of financial need, Councillor Attewell felt that it was important to provide people with the tools to help themselves. Managing personal finances was not taught in schools, but it was an important life skill, and the cost of living crisis could very well leave some individuals and families vulnerable to unscrupulous loan shark practices and payday loans with crippling interest payments. Membership of a credit union offered a safe and secure alternative. Currently, there were very few credit unions located in Norfolk, and none that I was aware of in Breckland. With the closure of mainstream bank branches and post offices in some rural towns and villages, this council needed to encourage alternatives. Breckland Council had the IT resources and an outstanding and innovative, inspiring communities team, who I believe could rise to this challenge. I'd hope that members would support this motion. In advance of the meeting, I'd submitted the motion to the director responsible for inspiring communities, and also had a conversation with the cabinet member too. I think what came out of that meeting, I was very encouraged and grateful for the opportunity to come to this committee to discuss it in more depth, with experts coming along to tell us more about credit unions. I'm also be interested to hear what sort of link there might be between citizens' advice and credit unions, and whether there's some sort of referral service, and also what specifically, because I've seen in the information on the presentation that's been sent, and I wasn't aware that credit unions can do specific work with local authorities and housing providers. And I was quite keen to hear more on that today as well. I just think that this is something that, you know, very little cost to the council. I think we can promote this to try and help people specifically at this moment in time. I think we do need to give the communities, and vulnerable people in particular, good, safe alternative tools to try and help themselves get through this difficult time. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing what everybody's got to say.
Thank you very much, Roger. Councillor Land, as the second, do you have anything you want to add at this stage?
Not at this stage. Be able to speak.
Of course, yes, you'll be able to
I'll be
speak.
able to speak later.
Yes, absolutely. In which case, Ruth, if you wouldn't mind putting up the other motion for fuel poverty as amended by full council. I'm coming to you, Harry, just. I think that's the original motion, which is helpful. No, the amended motion, please. Yeah, it's in Teresa's email, in the body of her email. If you're happy, Harry, I might get you to start speaking while it's... there we are. Okay, thank you. So yes, Harry, if you wouldn't mind speaking to the motion, and of course, you're welcome to reference the original one as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. I take it from your earlier remarks before the meeting started that after we've had the presentations, and we can then have a general discussion about ways in which we may go forward, the council, regardless of whether we're a decision-making body, anything that we may wish to take forward. So thank you for that. And obviously, it's very good to see a range of people here from a range of organisations, some of which I've worked with in the past locally and in the region. I should declare a sort of very slight interest, but it's not a pecuniary one, in that I did open the service point of the Norwich Credit Union, which was then housed in Broadland Housing in Dereham at the time. Very happy to do so. With regard to the two motions, just to explain for anybody that is looking at the much reduced motion, which was the amended motion that was passed at full council. There were two motions. There was the main motion, or the actual motion printed on the agenda paper proposed by Councillor Terry Jeremy on fuel poverty, a separate distinct motion on the 1st of September. And regrettably, an amendment was made at the full council on that motion, and that was then carried. So that then in effect became the, and Rob will correct me if I'm wrong, that then became the motion. In respect of that particular motion, the amended motion was voted against by councillors Burt, Brindle, myself, Dowling, Gilbert, Harvey, Jeremy, Land, Morton and Wickerson at the time. But nonetheless, the original motion also had a background referring to the earlier proposal by the opposition groups prior to the budget in terms of us actually doing more in terms of energy saving. In terms of the original motion that we had, that referred much more to fuel poverty, the Fuel Poverty Alliance, and a whole range of other things. Now, what the amended motion was instructing the Chief Executive Officer to create a strategy to facilitate ending fuel poverty in Breckland by 2030. That was the original thing, and they were all talking about energy efficiency of housing association stock, enforcement and regulation energy efficiency, looking at local eligibility to access energy company obligations, levering in funds to improve the energy efficiency standards of all housing, which I know some councils do, and looking at certification of new build homes, and also working in partnership with other agencies and any member of the Fuel Poverty Coalition. Now, the amendment, which took a different stance, referring to over at Scrutiny reports and updates on what this council is undertaking, so not what it isn't doing, to support those impacted by the cost of living increased fuel costs, which allow members to review the proposed change of energy company obligations, confirmation that this council will continue through all its communication channels, including the council magazine, to raise awareness of how residents can seek support and advice, along with initiatives to assist with the cost of living and increase energy costs. And when we've had our discussion with our presenters, I'll be happy to join in the general discussion about some improvements, many improvements I think we can make as a council, having done a review, not just in Norfolk, but elsewhere myself. The third item there was working with partners such as the LGA, district council networks, raising issues around domestic heating oil, levelling up issues, etc. So that's basically the amendment. So the amendment is mentioning fuel poverty, but in a much narrower focus in terms of what the council is actually doing, and the sense that in fact, as we're going to be talking about both motions, the sense was in the council's, the majority of the council voting was that we were already doing quite a lot, hence the voting of the amendment. But I do welcome nonetheless the many contributors that we're going to have here today. I should say, without because I normally talk too long, is I've had a look at what some other councils do, not just in Norfolk, but what has struck me, and you may want to comment when you contribute, other colleagues, is the different approaches, which is obviously going to be tailored to their communities, but also not just the style, but the substance in how people can access that information, how they're signposted, where we have links, where we don't. So there are some improvements that one can make regardless of the concern that some of us have at what some of us might feel was the weakening of the original motion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Tim, do you have anything you want to add at this stage?
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to add something on from Councillor Clark's point. So he has indicated exactly what happened. I regarded the amendment that was made as a referendum amendment because it totally and utterly changed the original motion. The as amended motion doesn't even mention fuel poverty, not anywhere in it. And this was rather disturbing because our constitution does not allow this to happen. Page 67 of the Constitution, 11.7.2. This is to do with amendments. Such omission, that's the what you've done to the original motion, omission, insertion or addition of words shall not have the effect of negating the motion before council. And that is precisely what happened. With all of that said, I no longer seconded the motion because it had been changed so much. So you've recorded me as being the seconder of the motion. That's not strictly true. I did not. I seconded the original motion and I withdrew my seconding from the
You're
amended
welcome
motion.
to stop speaking if you don't feel like the seconder of the motion any longer, and we can move on to the substantive debate if you like. Okay, very good. The last thing I'll do is I'll just go to Councillor Webb, who is the portfolio holder, who is probably closest to these issues, both fuel poverty and credit unions, in terms of just a overview of what the executive's been doing so far and perhaps some of the stuff she would like to see come out of the debate this morning.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome to those speakers. Thank you so much for coming along. And also thank you for bringing the motions forward. These are really, really important things that we're discussing today. And we, Breckland Council, want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to support our communities out there. So well appreciated all round. And thank you, Chairman, for the discussion, chance to actually talk about this. So Breckland Council over many years has invested significantly in helping our residents who are struggling with our finances one way or another. At the moment, as we all know, there is a real upturn in requirement for help out there. We are dealing with it really well, even though it's challenging. My officers, the officers here, should be commended for what they're doing to help our communities. There is a £50,000, which is an annual funding, go to Citizens Advice. Citizens Advice are extremely busy. Disinfected Citizens Advice as well. Two organisations, they have individuals contact them, and I'm glad they do contact them, because when you're in a muddle, the first thing you need to do is to talk to someone and get some advice about what your situation is. I know what they do is look at all the options, make sure they get all the benefits which they're entitled to, make sure that they're not paying direct debits for things they don't need, which is quite an often thing. I've been through my bank statement, I know what that's like. So cross them out. And then I know they refer people to the credit unions if it's applicable. So I know they're working together, and I feel quite confident you will hear this as you hear the speakers talk. On top of this, the officers have established a wider intervention coalition measure, which they have every week. They have meetings every week with, I think it's 45, I'm right, aren't I? 45 partners. And the idea with this meeting is bringing in all the partners, including Citizens Advice, to look at proactively helping people before they get to the crisis point. This is so, so important. Please don't let it get to that crisis point. They have been extremely successful with this. Things like housing support. The last round, we've asked for third-party referrals. We've found that works better. It means that we've issued £85,000 in the Household Support Fund, mainly for the purpose of helping to meet fuel costs, which we're talking about here, fuel costs. So 80% of these recipients are in receipt of housing benefits. This is really important. We're giving additional funding to the people who really need it, those vulnerable communities out there. Additionally, and I know we've talked about this before, but there are two debt advisors who we have come across are needed. They're going to be working as part of the Breckland housing team, but alongside Citizens Advice. So it's widening that team. So please don't think that we're not doing anything about looking at the issues that are out there. We're looking at all the issues, and we are changing things and doing things to support our community. There are other stuff, there's hotspots, hotspot funding coming out. I know I pushed an email out to all councillors this week. A lot of areas have already gone for that. It's become very useful in places like, well, village halls, for instance, where people who are struggling to pay their heating, which we're talking about today, they can go along and sit and have a free drink and get together in a nice warm environment. I personally think, and I know it's my personal opinion, that we as a team are doing everything we can to help with the issues that our community are facing. However, open-minded as ever, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be hearing today if there's any other things which we can pick up on, and overview and scrutiny would recommend us to look at. Thank you very much for your time. I know I waffle on, but I'm quite passionate about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what we'll do now, we have Chris, who has a presentation from the Eastern Savings and Loans Credit Union, and we'll hear from him first. And then just to forewarn the other subject matter experts we have here, if there's anything that you want to add just on the back of the initial comments that have been made, we've got a wide range of expertise here. If you've got something you think would be helpful to put in before the debate commences, then I'll come to you after Chris has presented. So I think Ruth is just putting you up on the screen, and then you'll be good to go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Mole. I'm the Chief Executive of Eastern Savings and Loans Credit Union. I'm also the chair of the regional forum in the East of England for our trade body, which is the Association of British Credit Unions. Also representing credit unions, got two colleagues from Norwich Credit Union, and of those, David Anderson is also an officer of the regional forum. So you're very well represented today. Move on. The credit union that has a common bond. All credit unions have a common bond, something that binds us, our membership, together. Ours is living in the geography of Suffolk, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, and now North and Central Essex. We were formed through the merger of Ipswich and Suffolk Credit Union with Norfolk Credit Union, a meeting about which was the last time I was in this room a number of years ago, about 2014, I think. And we also merged with Cambridge City Credit Union in 2015. We started life 20 years ago as just Ipswich Credit Union in 2002. Next slide, please. Just to give you a feel for the scale of our business, we have 1.7 million on deposit, and we have about 850,000 on loan. We did actually manage to get that over the million mark before COVID, but as with every other credit union in the country, our business went backwards a little bit during COVID. We have 3,600 members, 1,000 active loans, and we are the largest credit union in the east of England. Next slide. One of the things about us now is we are fully online with our membership and loan application processes. We have a website which is fully responsive and mobile and tablet friendly, and we use technologies such as open banking instead of paper bank statements, electronic document signatures for our loan agreements, and we have a 9:30 to 4:30 telephone service. So we try to be as accessible and responsive and able to deliver services in the way that that people want to use them in the 21st century. And for example, one of the things we found is that in the rural areas where traditional methods of trying to provide outreach to members used to be a couple of volunteers sitting in a village hall for a couple of hours on a Wednesday afternoon. That wasn't successful in the long run, but online we are now seeing people from all sorts of remote locations joining our credit union. To give you an idea of where the core business is, it is very much around lending. And typically, we offer loans. Our average loan size is around 500 for our 3% loans, but we can go up to 2,000 with those, and above that we do a loan up to 4,000 at a 2% per calendar month. A part of that, to give you an indication of our capacity, we process something like 500 child benefit payments weekly for a contribution towards low payments, and we turn our applications around within 1 to 2 days, which is the sort of service that people, as I say, expect in the 21st century. Next slide, please. Just a quick comparison. People sometimes look at our APR and say, gosh, I can get better than that at my bank. That may be true if you have the sort of income that will service that sort of bank account. What we find very often is that the alternatives that many of our members would otherwise use are those examples given here, with much more significant interest rates. And as I mentioned in my in the paper that I circulated before your meeting, the illegal money lending team very much recommend credit unions in areas where there are problems with loan sharks, and that's a whole another topic of discussion which we could have. Next slide, please. Very important for us also is the emphasis on savings, and for us also being able to provide transactional accounts. So we offer secondary savings account, including Christmas clubs, where we encourage people to save. And as Councillor Atwell described earlier on, we are completely covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So any deposits that people have with us, unlike an informal Christmas savings club, are fully covered by that protection scheme. We also offer junior accounts to encourage younger members into the savings habit. But very important from a financial inclusion perspective is the offer of a pay-as-you-go account. What we offer is something called the Engage account. It's only available through credit unions, and it is a very useful tool for people who have inability to get an account, a bank account, because they have problems with their credit history, and because this offers no overdraft, it contains no risks for them there, and is very useful to people because the Visa card is fully functional, can be used in shops, online, and is contactless. And as I say, that becomes an inclusion tool for them. Next slide, please. We do have fees. We ask people to pay £5 to join. Actually, £2 of that is actually the membership fee, and £3 goes towards their initial shareholding. Everything that somebody saves with us goes into a share account, and is therefore part of what we can pay a dividend on when we make a profit at the end of the year. We also charge a membership charge of £1 every 4 weeks to cover many of the costs that we incur in the processing of loans and the administration of accounts. The Engage account costs £3.50 monthly, just for example. But part of the value that people get for the membership charge is that we have free life and loan cover for members. So in the circumstances of an unfortunate death, a loan costs can be usually covered by our group insurance policy. And in the case of deposits, they are usually doubled, but it does depend on age and pre-existing points. And so there are conditions to that, but it's a very important service that we offer. Next slide, please. As I said, in the 21st century, people do their business differently, and we promote credit union and its services on our loans using Facebook and Google adverts. We've developed extensive in-house skills and knowledge to track the effectiveness of that. And that leads to us receiving something like 100 loan applications weekly. Next slide, please. Partnerships. We have 10 payroll partners, and we also work with local authorities to support vulnerable adults in Suffolk through our pay-as-you-go card solution. And we offer green loans. I mentioned in my paper where I omitted to complete a sentence. I do apologise. And I was talking about the local authority partners. We work with Suffolk on green loans and Broadland District on green loans. We worked with Broadland District for a long while on rent deposits, and the mistake that I made was that I said we previously had a rent and deposit and small loans scheme, and I omitted to say with Breckland Council, which was quite critical. But that didn't secure a lot of take up. That was through the housing department. And curiously, that gives an example of another point that I made in there, in that we are small organisations with limited capacity. And when we're dealing with larger partners, if those partners change the lead individual that we're dealing with, then sometimes we find that the interest and the commitment fades away. So that's a sort of point that I think would be useful for you to understand in how you can support credit unions into the future. And in that instance, I think the individual that came to want to do rent and advance lending in Breckland had come from Broadland and seen the work that we've done there and was keen to do that. I think that just takes me to a summary, which says that we have very much moved away from the traditional credit union operating model, which, as I said, generated a lot of very frustrated volunteers. We are now pleased to be grant-free in our ability to generate surplus in the last 2 years. We're not a charity, we are a profit-sharing business, so we apply as much of that surplus as we can to a dividend to our shareholders. We'll be looking at other ways to invest the surplus back into the business. Our priority is promoting awareness of the credit unions and developing our technology further to enable integration of new tools such as a mobile app, because that is, as I've made a point a couple of times, the sort of approach that people want from their interaction with financial services businesses in this day and age. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Happy to answer questions in whatever time space is appropriate to the meeting.
Thank you very much. I have some questions, certainly, but I won't ask them yet because I just want to give the opportunity to all of the other organisations we have present, just if there's anything, against the backdrop of high inflation, economic difficulty, vulnerable people facing higher energy bills. Are there any comments that any of you wish to make before we go to members on questions generally across these two pieces that you think would be helpful to inform the debate?
Okay, thank you, Chair. What I could do, I think, just to balance this is to give a bit of a summary as well of some of the examples that we're seeing that lead to examples where credit union comes. And I think really the first thing I should say is to thank Councillor Webb for her really heartfelt and very accurate summary of the very clear and apparent need that exists around the fuel poverty issue right now and the cost of living. And the essential nature really of citizens' advice, of which you've got both Norfolk and Thetford and Diss in the room today, is to really truly understand the nature of a crisis and then systematically work through those particular problems, because crisis represents a number of things that are going wrong, not necessarily one. And we need to be able to break those down and make the appropriate referrals and really to get the best and clearest outcomes. Old direct debits is a very good example, but there are many others that we can really only unpick with that regular face-to-face engagement that we then get. So our commitment quite clearly to Breckland now is to find more locations that we can actually provide that service in a cost-effective way. We're already full-time at the Abbey Estate. We've got a number of outreach locations that we use on a regular basis, and we are in very advanced conversations with the Charles Burrell Centre to take permanent space in there. So any individual with any particular crisis or any particular issue can come to us at any time, and we can start that particular journey. But actually, I think the best thing I can do very quickly is bring my colleague Caroline, who's one of our most senior advisors, just to bring to life a little bit more of some of those examples and explain the nature of what we do and why the relationship that we have with you guys is so important. If that's okay, Chair?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I'm Caroline Mackinson, and I coordinate the Norfolk Warm and Wise project, which is a partnership between ourselves at Diss and Thetford and Norfolk Systems Advice. So we provide a county-wide energy advice service. The project's funded by Energy Redress, and we've been going for about 1.5 years now. During that time, we've had quite an insight into the situation particularly with the prices rising. But what I would like to talk about is a bit about the sort of complexity often of what people are facing. We obviously welcome the amount of support people are being given. We've had access to various pots of funding for crisis support, but I think it's also important to think about the longer term. And actually, very much our work is about trying to move people forward. So not just providing an emergency fuel voucher or paying their bill now, but actually looking at why they're in that situation and how we can improve that situation. So there's 3 areas I think just want to highlight. I mean, most of the people who are coming to us are vulnerable. Most of them are in fuel poverty or at risk of fuel poverty. One of the key areas I'd say is communication. So many people are struggling to access services. Energy suppliers are not the easiest to contact. And since the pandemic, that's been made even more difficult. So a lot of what we're doing is contacting energy suppliers on behalf of our clients. We're doing that through dedicated telephone numbers. And we're often obviously trying to empower the clients during those conversations, whether it's a 3-way call or having a client with us, to give them confidence to be able to have that conversation so that they can get the support they need. And that includes things like getting on the priority services register. Meter readings has been a massive issue. So many of the people who are slipping into fuel poverty is because their bills have not been accurate. And we are seeing a lot more people, not just people on prepaid meters, but people paying by direct debit with credit meters who are struggling to afford their energy. And some of that is just made so much worse by the fact that they don't get regular meter readings and bills get out of sync. So communication is really key. Obviously, a lot of energy companies went out of business, which made things even worse. A lot of people found themselves not sure even who their energy supplier was. And just last week, Ofgem announced 17 of the energy companies were failing their vulnerable clients. And an important part of our role at Systems Advice throughout the country is to try and bring about change. So obviously we provide advice, but we also campaign for change. So we are trying to share that voice of the most vulnerable consumers back nationally with Systems Advice to provide the evidence they need to make people's voice heard on these issues. So the help that's available is great. There's lots of different pots of funds, but we are finding those people who are most vulnerable are the ones that are struggling the most to access the funds. So for example, with the council tax rebate back in the summer, those people who didn't pay direct debit obviously weren't getting the money automatically. And I appreciate it wasn't the local councils who set up the scheme, and it's challenging to communicate something that's passed down. But certainly, you know, a good example where those people who really needed that money on their bills the most didn't get it automatically. And I think that's the same with a lot of schemes. You know, we've heard that a lot of people on prepaid meters recently haven't been getting their £66 automatically. And again, communication, it may be their energy supplier doesn't have the correct email address or text number to send the voucher. So we're spending a lot of time just making sure people are getting all of those forms of help they should be getting. And obviously a lot of people are digitally excluded. They may have access to the internet, but not be confident using the app that the energy company have got on their phone. They can't get into it, they don't know how to use it. Lots of language issues as well. So we're obviously helping a lot of people where we can, face to face, because it's a lot easier for them to come in and bring a bill and us show the pictures of different types of heating and things to try and support them that way. Future proofing is something that we really do look at. So when someone comes to us needing help in an emergency sort of energy situation, we would look at what the energy performance certificate is of their property. We're looking at how they're using their heating. We're looking at ways they could potentially save, what grants they might be able to access. But a lot of those things are really difficult to access. I think for people who don't have the confidence to upload documents, to do their own budgets and those type of things. So, you know, very keen to work with the council more, particularly around the housing issue. We do see some quite shocking cases of, and not all of our clients are confident to raise issues around their housing. Just a case study, an example of the kind of things we see. Someone came to us, this is actually before the massive hike in energy prices. Someone came to us who suddenly was told their direct debit was going from something like £70, quite a small property. A client was living with his daughter, going from something like £70 a month, was suddenly told it was going to go to 200. And essentially he had been paying for about a year. He had a smart meter, but the direct debit hadn't been calibrated correctly. So suddenly he was facing a big bill, a back bill. And so obviously they were going to just put it on the direct debit, spread it out, but it was just totally unaffordable. So we were able to access a grant through the energy supplier for him to pay off his deficit. And moving forward, we were looking at actually why was the bill so high for such a small property? And we believe his landlord had told him just to leave the heater on for the water 24/7. So, you know, moving forward, he was able to look at ways he could reduce the costs. And also we were able to order him an in-house display for his smart meter, so that he was actually able to see in real time what he was using. Because sadly, energy companies, if the previous tenant has taken the in-house display with them, don't automatically replace them. So they're just an example of somebody who, through no fault of their own, was suddenly found with a massive, you know, was in a fuel poverty situation. And obviously we're seeing a lot of that type of case come through. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just to comment on that, we do. Norfolk Woman Wise obviously runs throughout Norfolk, but we're coming to the end of that funding soon. So you know, in terms of, in the spirit of collaboration, we could work together, get assistance on looking at what that funding bid looks like going forward, and we'll be doing that from January. So just, you know, just to put that out there, that we're very happy to work with people on how that could work going forward in Norfolk, so that no one falls through the cracks, which is what we're about, really, covering all the area of Norfolk.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Mark Hitchcock. I'm Chief Officer of Norfolk Citizens Advice. Just for the confused people who might be in the room, we are two separate charities, two separate companies delivering the same service, working in many projects, so working very closely. We're in Attleborough, Swaffham, Dereham, and delighted to be here with my colleagues and also to be able to speak to you today. Thank you for your continued support, and there are other things that we can be doing together, as my colleagues have suggested. You may wish to get us back in so we can tell you more about our data, because the things I'll tell you now are just tidbits. We can go into greater detail. We could answer quite a lot of detailed questions if you asked us to. Debt has become your primary issue in Brecon. It wasn't in the top 5 issues, maybe even 12 months ago. Energy and charitable contributions. We reached last year's levels of issues in those 2 areas in April this year. So it's only getting worse, actually, in that case. In terms of the original motion, our data suggesting that 56% of the issues under debt relate to fuel debt, So I think you're right to be discussing this and to be looking at what options you could consider. We've done some work also that we could circulate to any interested members about heating oil. So you will know the prices have rocketed and they're 30% up since February. And if you don't know, you're hugely reliant on it as well as a district. So looking at different options there and considering what can be done to try and get more representation and regulation in that space. We have some data that we could pass on to you and we've passed to MPs in the last 12 months. We do have multiple energy advice projects and Caroline's leadership on that is immense. We have some amazing people that can help clients, so do please point them towards us. I would just underline the fact that we're seeing not just complexity now, but severity in cases. So complexity shot up through the pandemic. Very few people come to us with one issue. And now we're seeing severity in those cases as well. So it's taking longer for all of our organizations to support those people. One other point I would make just on the energy share is that I'd thank Councillor Webb as well for the support, but also kind of a culture and approach. So we were invited onto the Health and Wellbeing Partnership recently. I would encourage you to consider that to be quite an important tool in making some action in these areas. So we can come together, work together as organisations, make sure those gaps are reduced so people don't fall through, and share learning and innovate our services as well. So we're looking forward to talking to that group from both Citizens Advice around hardship and what we can do to support people across Brecon better very soon. On credit unions, just as a kind of a point of clarity, Citizens Advice would recommend informed use of credit unions, but we are not registered to be able to recommend any individual credit unions. So I'm being even more careful about what I say about this than I would be. But again, the original reason I think for the motion was to avoid the much worse options that are out there in society for people. And I do seem to get reports on that on a fairly regular basis of loan sharking in the Brecon and also West Norfolk areas quite predominantly. So again, I'm glad you're looking at it, but it's informed use and I won't comment on anything that Chris said in the presentation. But thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Okay, so I'll throw it open to members then. Harry, if we start with you and then go round as David.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's really in two parts. It's less, I'm afraid, questions to the presenters. So obviously, I'd like to acknowledge their extremely valuable work as someone who's been involved in civic life a long time. I first got involved in supporting vulnerable people when I was in the sixth form. I was then promoting, as was in London, the implementation uptake of the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act. So I got the bug of helping people, fortunate, less fortunate, more fortunate than myself, ever since, what I've tried to do on and off ever since. So fair play to you for coming along today. Not everybody knows what they do, and sometimes, you know, CAB or credit unions are seen as sometimes as the poor man's or poor man or woman's bank and last resort. I'm fully aware of loan shark, because many years ago I had a lodger who had a doorstep loan, and they kept saying, well, if you pay this off, we'll give you another loan, and it was 2,000% and getting into all sorts of trouble, and I gave you know, advice which was ignored. But moving on from our wonderful speakers, I hope that this has been, you know, at least some more information, education to members. But going back to the Scrutiny Committee itself, our primary role here is supposed to be looking at recommendations, and not just from full council, but actual decisions of the council and the cabinet, either calling things in and holding things open to scrutiny. So in the nicest possible way and with the most utmost respect, you know, for everyone's enthusiasm and passion, I said I was disappointed that leaving aside the procedural thing, that we've got two separate motions at two separate meetings. The first one on fuel poverty was the 1st of September. I would have been expecting a report from officers, obviously highlighting proper in tabular form all the excellent information that Alison was giving us, doing some horizon scanning, possibly making some recommendations in what we're doing, because unlike, say, planning and other things, some of these areas don't have any key performance indicators. We could say, well, we've done this, but what could we be doing more of? I would like to have seen something saying, yes, we've done this, but are there any groups that we haven't yet reached? What sort of milestones should be reaching? Going on to some specifics, when I've looked at what some other councils have done, they've gone down different routes in terms of energy, but sometimes it's a matter of style. If you look at, I'd suggest officers look at this and possibly get someone an external. If you look at our own website and compare it with others, and this is trying to be constructive, you've got, some of them have got headlines with cost of living, and when you open that up, you have very clear signposts in looking at things like, I've seen one that says food banks, energy, what credit you're entitled to, benefit support, money and debt advice, warm spaces. So for the ordinary citizen resident, it's very clear. That's assuming people have got time to get on the phone and they're digitally aware. That's a separate issue. And the cost of phoning up. I was phoning up a charity the other day for 2 hours and it shut at 12 and I had to give up. That's because they've such a big caseload, local charity. So that's partly a matter of style, but also in terms of some of the substance. Some local authorities have got things like a money navigator tool, so you can actually look at areas how you might be signposted. And because you have different things between authorities, other than putting people to the government support, you know, this is still available, this isn't available, there's not necessarily any commonality with all their approaches. There are obviously others umbrella networks with the foundation and stuff across Norfolk, but so it's a navigational issue, and then it's an actual, you know, a content issue. So if you were looking at, say, inspiring communities, you wouldn't necessarily think that that was going to be necessarily about debt advice and warm advice and so forth. At a lot of the sites, you've then got to go into sub menus, and that's where colleagues at CAB and people would help people navigate round. But I am disappointed that we didn't have a report in front of us today, given that the October was the credit union, but also the fuel poverty motion. Even the amended motion, obviously, as Councillor Burt said, emasculated the original motion, which would have required the council to sign up to a number of initiatives and take some action. The amended motion talks about communication, and I'm very happy to advise Councillor Webb on the things that I could suggest, or for other officers to look at, you know, to improve what we are doing. We refer to the work of the partners here, and some colleagues here for CAB talked about signposting and partnership. But
if I may, Harry, if you have specific points that you think would be useful for this council,
I will make those points in writing to Councillor Webb. But I'm just saying the way this has been constructed, with not having some of this information in advance. I mean, it does. The phrase comes to mind, not so much fuel poverty, but more, you know, a poverty of ambition. I think we should not be complacent at all about any things that we're doing, and be prepared to look at things that are made by colleagues across the political spectrum, rather than simply knocking opposition amendments sometimes and then parking them, hopefully not into the long grass. Both of the motions express the view and the commentary that these wouldn't be put into the long grass, and I'm very much hope that they won't be. Thank you. That's what I've got to say at the moment, but I will be forwarding constructive suggestions to Councillor Webb to pass on to officers, Chairman.
That's heartening news. And David.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our guest behind this. Sorry, you have to look at the back of my head, but very informative. And I think the credit union system obviously is vital at this particular moment of time. I just have a very simple question, really. Is the is that a competitive business in the sense of you've got a variety of credit unions that you might apply to? Is the interest rate common across all credit unions, or is there competition, if that's the right word to use, for business? Thank you.
It is very definitely the case that there are usually more than one credit union operating in an area, but the interest rates tend to be the maximum, which is 3% per calendar month, is set in the credit union legislation. Many will, particularly community-based credit unions, will use that because that enables them to cover the administrative costs more effectively. I did try to make the point in my paper that across different credit unions, particularly in the UK, different types might have different interest rate strategies, but that tends to be driven more by their client base. So credit unions that are more employer oriented tend to have a more stable membership in terms of being in the work, and therefore pose less of a bad debt risk, which is a cost to the credit union, and therefore are sometimes able to charge lower interest rates. But you know, I have to say I don't entirely know. I can't speak for Norwich because I don't know exactly what they do.
Okay.
Good morning. My name's John Warren. I'm the chair of Norwich Credit Union. Our rates are slightly different from yours, and our structure is different from yours. We base our loans on savings, and our normal rate is 1.5% a month or 18%. Now, our average loan is around £1,000, and so it's very competitive for £1,000 loan. However, where we're not competitive is getting the loan out. Unlike Chris, we can't turn a loan round in 1 or 2 days normally. We're volunteer led, volunteer run, and consequently there might not be a volunteer that day. But we endeavour to do our best. We have had a presence in Dereham for a while, but it folded sadly, to answer Councillor Atlas. And I think that's our problem. We cannot promote ourselves efficiently. I would add a word of caution about credit unions. They're a tool for financial resilience. They're not a panacea for poverty. And the one thing I try and impress on our members is if you can't afford to save, you can't afford to borrow. It's an old credit union adage, and I think we ought to bear in mind that going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to come back, David, or is that?
Thank you, Joe. Only to the extent in the research I did prior to today's meeting, I did actually pull up the typical £500 loan from Norfolk and also from Eastern Counties, and there's a minor difference of about £20, I think, over a period of a year between the two. And it just raised that question in my mind about I would not be advising my population in Swaffham, for which I was a board member, to which credit union to go to. I'd probably refer them to the CAB, to be honest with you. But I noticed the CAB are not in a position to recommend a credit union. That's the reason I asked the question, because whether in fact there was a uniform, you've got your 3%, which is there, but it does obviously vary from credit union to credit union. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may jump around between fuel poverty and the credit unions because I was furiously making notes. So forgive me, I may ask a question and then there may be a follow-up, but I do have specifics. The first thing I want to ask is the CAB. How stretched are your resources at the moment? Because I should imagine the one thing that struck me is you do some fantastic work. I should imagine your workload has gone from here up to here. You said that there's a lot more debt as people are coming to you with debt problems. A lot of those are now fuel related. So how well resourced are you? And if a person comes to you and they are in crisis, what's the sort of turnaround time for them to actually get an appointment and sit down with an advisor? So I'd like an answer to that first, please.
Maybe I can talk about the first part, and we'll pass you across to my colleagues to talk about appointments and responsiveness. The strategic level is very concerning for us. So probably between the two organisations in front of you, I have to guess actually pre-COVID, we probably supported over 30,000 people across Norfolk. Norfolk Citizens Advice alone lost about 75% of its volunteers through COVID, and we're only halfway back to that. And at the same time, you've seen the busiest year in Citizens Advice demand since 1939. So just in terms of our phone call system, we are probably only capturing less than 20% of the calls coming through because of the sheer volume that's shot up. We've also seen a trend whereby digital, so phones, emails, and to a degree web chat, was very, very low level prior to COVID. It shot up during COVID, as you might expect, and it hasn't dropped. So we've seen a change in the nature of demand as well, and we're trying to move as quickly as we can to address that. So no, we have a level of demand that is unservable, and that's true across the whole of the advice sector and VCSE. You may have noticed recently we announced an emergency across the advice sector in Norfolk because of that lack of funding. And just as a bit of a snapshot in terms of Norfolk Citizens Advice budget, I think the last time I checked, around 24–25% of it was funded through grants. The rest of it we go out and source through contracts to supply the kind of advice that colleagues have mentioned, or fundraising. So our options in terms of accessing funds to fill a gap, which would need to be hundreds of thousands of pounds, are very challenging at the moment. So we're trying to find new ways of working, ways of trying to support people more efficiently. But no, the demand is huge. In terms of people waiting for responses, would you like to say anything, guys?
Well, obviously we're able to be accessed in different channels. So Mark talks about the sort of the waiting time for advice line. So that's huge. You know, we do our best, and we do our best with who we have on the end of the phone, on the end of an email, and who comes in to us. And it depends on what situation they're in. So we have to look at the urgency of the situation. If someone's, you know, if that urgency is within, you know, a day to 7 days time frame, then they're our priority, which then bumps other people who may fall into that crisis time off the list. But Thetford is particularly stretched, and that's why we're trying to increase our footprint and our outreach across the area in order to scoop up people where we can in different locations, as opposed to be centred in one location in the Abbey. But the waiting time now for Thetford is we're starting to book into January, which is not good enough. So from our point of view, that's not for the want of trying. In terms of the volunteers we have, they're amazing, and we're getting more volunteers, but we need more volunteers. But the turnaround time for training in terms of the standard that we offer, our AQS standard, means a huge commitment from those volunteers in terms of getting them into to being able to put them in front of a client. And that's the standard that Citizens Advice is required across all national citizens advices. We can't just put people in front of people to offer advice, obviously. So yeah, we're very, very stretched, as it were. And we want to ensure we maintain that standard to help people to the best level. So I hope that answers it to a certain extent.
It might just be worth me noting as well, somebody mentioned signposting earlier on. 90% of our work is solving the problem or casework. So we don't signpost very often, we prefer not to. But where we're working with other VCSE partners largely, but maybe some statutory services, where we're passing them on to our peer advisors, they are stretched as well. And they are having to change their strategies. they are underfunded. So the whole system isn't creaking, it's a kind of emergency point now. So whilst we will always be there, and to be fair, I think you're looking at two citizens advice organisations that have maintained open door policies when the vast majority across the country can't. While we try and do that, actually we're fully stretched, and any support that we can get in that way is valuable, particularly for our organisation, but I'm sure the same is true for Chris. We're now very, very worried about our own staff's well-being, given what they're seeing at the front door, their desire to help everybody, and their inability to help everybody. So we're having to make some very difficult decisions and have hard conversations with them. But that's the reality that we're seeing across the piece. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That sounds very worrying, actually, because I can see the problem's only going to get worse. And if there's somebody who's in crisis, and we're now talking about appointments in January, in the middle of a winter fuel crisis, quite frankly, whatever we're talking about here and what we're doing at the moment, it's just a sticking plaster. I have to say, Alison, I completely accept that Brecon Council does quite a lot, and you've got your family support fund, hardship funds, etc. The problem is there's just the sheer problem is getting to the point where I think it's almost insurmountable for some people. And I'll give you our family support fund. We give somebody in crisis. I helped the family recently, and they get £300 for that, which they can use towards fuel, or they can use towards food, clothing, a range of things. But £300, while we might think of that as a sizable sum, actually, when it comes to the fuel, if you're a family that's a rural family relying on oil heating, in Breckland, we've got 16,500 properties which are fueled by heating oil, just by the rural nature of where we are. So they're not necessarily getting the help that you would get through your electricity bills, your gas bills, etc. The oils, help for the oil scheme, I think nationally there's issues because nobody seems to know when the hell the money's coming through. But the issue with the £300 is, although very good, we've set a criteria that they can't come back for any more for a 6-month period. And I totally understand that we don't have an unlimited pot. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I don't have the answers. I'm more concerned about more of a problem that I'm hearing today. And I've got to ask CAB, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and don't worry about if Alison Webb puts a glance your way, because I'm asking this question. She might not like what I've got to ask, but if you could get additional, if you need additional help, what do you need from this council? Now, you've said that you'd need hundreds of thousands, and that's not realistic, but from what I heard, we give £50,000 a year to CAB as an organisation. That, with an Inspiring Communities budget of over £1 million, doesn't sound an awful lot in the great big scheme of things. So I'm sitting here wondering, is that £50,000 enough? What extra do you need? What resources would be helpful from this council? Because this council does have considerable resources, and it also has the ability to cajole and speak to other authorities in the area, all the district councils, the county councils, some who are represented here today. So my question is, what do you need? What would help from this council to help your situation, to help provide the service in a more timely fashion, and try and help you, because you seem to be in a bit of crisis yourself, with all due respect, purely on resources, lack of trained people who can sit in front of somebody and give them that advice. So I suppose I'm turning it around. What do you need? Although we're giving you £50,000, what could this council do practically to try and help? So I'd like a response to that, and then I'm going to follow up again if I may, because I do have specifics.
I will go to some other members first, but then we'll come back, no doubt, to hear you again, Roger. Go ahead. What do you need? And then Alison, I'll let you speak.
What a great question. I mean, we can answer it in a number of ways. I mean, the first thing to say is that we are incredibly grateful for all the support that you give us currently, and we have a number of ways that we utilize every penny that comes through our door in terms of core funding and being able to provide access to schemes and programs. The nature of the challenge that we have is not unique in any kind of commercial environment. The onboarding time that it takes to recruit. We, the volunteers, 75% of our workforce is volunteers, and put them through the appropriate programs to train is not something we can accelerate or speed up and wouldn't want to. Our credibility and our ability to be certified and qualified would be jeopardized if we did. The nature of the work that we're doing, though, is where we would seek opportunities would be very much around greater collaboration. Charles Burrell Centre will be a good example. The more space that we can occupy there, where we can provide the resources and the support, is enhanced by the relationship we might have in terms of what our costs of being in that space would be. So greater collaboration in environments where we can get more support as we bring it on board to the locations that need it, and support with us with elements of productivity and exposure and engagement. There's a huge piece of collaboration I think that we could do better and smarter. There are huge amounts of data, my colleague Mike will spoke about it as well, which we think is very relevant, that we'd like to be able to express and get into organisations that maybe enable us to be more creative and innovative in terms of producing more schemes that provide support. So we are the feet on the ground mechanism, you are the enablers. If we can actually be able to work in ways that actually are a bit more surgeon's knife in terms of particular programs and fund those programs as well, then that's very interesting and engaging. But I think the spirit really of what we're doing is, yes, we are challenged. We will rise to that challenge. The queue at the door means that we'll open more doors. Whilst we're triaging into January, we never turn anybody away. If somebody's turned up on our door with a crisis, we'll deal with it. There are the scales of particular problems that means that we can delay some of the responses that we get into January, but it's not our nature to turn people away. But we are very aware of what's coming. We're not anywhere near the eye of the storm yet. So the greater engagement that we have, the more opportunity that we have to be collaborative, I think that's where greater support may come, as opposed to being able to sort of give you a sort of more sort of detailed spreadsheet kind of answer at this stage.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'd just like 200 grand, but the answer was Chris's answer is absolutely bang on. Can I just add two more points really? One is we're not in the room talking to the other councils in the way we're talking to you. So you should take some pride from the fact that there's a degree of a cultural approach. I mentioned it earlier on, but I want to underline it, that you were talking to us in a way that not everybody else is. We are working with all the other district councils and the county council, but it needs to be in a meaningful, in a new way. Because if we hold to our normal positions, nothing's going to change. So we have to find a new way of working. And your councillors and Steve particularly have opened the door to that conversation, and it makes a big difference. So if we are respectful but challenging of each other, then I think we're going to get a lot more for the people of Breckland. And when funds arise, then we can be sensible at how we invest them, and we can advise you on investing it somewhere else, not necessarily in our organisations. But their health and wellbeing partnerships have popped up across the piece. I think they could just be talking shops unless we really task them and push them forward, but they could also be your key delivery tool to try and improve the well-being in the longer term. I would say some of the better practice that we've seen elsewhere on that is a two-tiered approach. So how are we going to get through Christmas? How are we going to put emergency responses in? How are we going to share information between the agencies? And there's not that many of them, but they don't talk very often or closely in some cases. So bringing us together is key. And I think then how are we going to stop the longer term effects of what we're seeing at the moment? Because you've got generational impacts of the poverty you're seeing now, kids growing up now will be in the same position in 25 years and much worse if we don't do something differently. So tasking us to be innovative and giving us the support to do that would be great. The question immediately, I'd start thinking about what can we have some free space. There's other bits and pieces that we can do. We can't get that conversation anywhere else, but we're starting to have that conversation with you. So we're starting from a good place, but I think you should challenge us to try and do more as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Alison. I have Terry, then I have Robert, then I'll go Tim, then I'll go me, then I'll go Harry, and then I'll be back to Roger again. So Alison
That's just
first.
on Roger's side of things. Thank you, Roger. And thank you for that. Right, okay, volunteers. Everybody knows that there's a shortage of volunteers right across all the paths of life. You said about 75% of volunteers. 75% is a lot of your staff who are handling and taking the weight of a lot of the calls that are coming in. I get that. Myself, I go and volunteer for the Swanton Morley for the inoculation centre because they haven't got anybody to do it. This is why the volunteering side of things needs to be encouraged, published and taken forward. Yes, we do recognise the issues, Roger, and we recognise before the motions come forward, being honest. And that's why we looked at the 2 debt advisors, the need for these 2 additional debt advisors to help with what's coming. And they are underway. We've got two additional debt advisors. Right, okay, obviously come to general purposes meeting, the next one, I believe. And we've recognised that this is an issue. That's probably why, because it hasn't come to the meeting yet, but we knew about that right back 2 or 3 months ago. We recognised that there was something needed to be done to help citizens' advice. And, you know, it's something that we recognise we need to, the support we need to provide to our communities to help all round, because it's a difficult time for everybody. So it's just about the volunteers and to reassure that we are thinking about that. Well, we know we're going to be putting forward 2 additional debt advisors from Breckland, Paper Breckland.
And Terry.
Some thank yous to start off with. Firstly, thank you to you, Councillor Webb, for your hard work. It's really appreciated. Thanks to you good people for coming along, both the CAB and the credit union. Sorry. As the CAB, I'm a massive fan. I do. You'll all be tired of me talking about this, but I volunteer at the Charles Burrell Centre, and I'm often referring people to you because you do such good work, and have actually on one occasion asked for some help myself regarding my parents' care needs and got some very good advice. So thanks very much. It's really appreciated. But, and I think this is the problem in both cases, actually, both the credit union and the CAB. Neither of you are a vaccination for the disease that we've got of fuel poverty in particular, but a pill after catching it. The waiting list for the CAB reinforces the feeling we need to act with the CAB just as one of our options, and I don't mean to do you down by saying that, just one of our options instead of the only option. As I said, when I seconded the original motion, I'm a bit disappointed that we're still sitting here talking. I said at the original motion that the time for action is now. The time for action was then. So we need to get a move on here.
Thank you, Terry. Robert.
Yeah, thank you. We are going through unprecedented times. Those of you as old as me can remember the oil crisis in the mid-70s, rapid inflation. We didn't have the problems we have nowadays because our society is completely different to what it was 45, 50 years ago. And because of that, I think as a council, we need to think differently, because these times are different from anything we've had in the past. And I really think we need to be so fleet of foot to put things in place quickly, rather than go through myriads of committees, etc., etc. Tim knows that I'm an ardent supporter of the Citizens Advice Bureau from our time on Durham Town Council. Citizens Advice are unique in that people will go to them first. They won't come to us as a council because they don't know what we can do, yet they know the Citizens Advice Bureau will point them in the right direction, give them advice, etc. And I think it should be on us to really put some resource, okay, only temporarily, because this crisis will pass. It will sort itself out given time, they always do. But I think we should be really fleet of foot at the moment and put some resource into not just Citizens Advice, but those bodies that give advice and help to people that are perhaps can't or don't know how to come to us as a council and help us. My view.
Thank you. Tim.
As Robert's just said, yes, we have got a good connection with Citizens Advice. In fact, I sat on the board of the one of Mid Norfolk Citizens Advice before it was amalgamated into Norfolk. And I think you're hearing the same story from Roger and Robert or across around the room. I think we need to actually put more funding into this as on an emergency basis. Also, increase our hardship fund so that you've got something to draw upon. Now, we're getting to the point very soon of budget setting, so I think this is perhaps something that we need to be addressing in that arena as well. But despite that, I'm sure that there must be things that we can do even faster than waiting for us to actually put it into a budget. Could I come back to the credit union? Just some queries on the way that the weekly, the monthly, 4-weekly charge is factored in. I'm guessing that's not in the repayments that you put in the charts here. But is this it's a relatively large sum of money to stay within the, I'll put inverted commas around the club. Is that an off-putting element to actually joining a credit union? And is that something that the council can help with in terms of again funding when we're just looking at this in the big round? If we could help the administrative side of things, would that enable more people to be members and use the facility?
It's an individual choice of each credit union, and I don't think Norwich have a membership charge of that. Oh, you do now? Okay. Yeah. So ours is 13, so it's kind of different, but it's a recognition that, for example, we have regulatory obligations to undertake anti-money laundering checks on any individual applying to join a credit union. That costs us money. So, there are administrative costs. Ours probably, because we offer a 9:30 to 4:30 telephone service, is another cost that we have to ensure that we're able to cover. So I don't think there's an obvious way in which we would look at a local authority to underwrite that, unless it was in a specific partnership where that was a choice that the council wanted to make about its clients. If it was recommending clients join the credit union in order to do a rent deposit scheme or a oil loan scheme, or one of the many sort of schemes that we might do, then that would be a point of choice to say, do you want to cover the membership costs for that client of yours to become a member of the credit union?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's options that we can think about in the future, so that's good.
Actually, following on from Tim's point, similar. So vulnerable people have a lot of structural costs, which I don't think people who are less vulnerable suffer. If you're on a prepaid meter, I think now everyone has to pay the same kilowatt hour cost, but they do still. You've got that cost. If you're unbanked, you don't have access to all of the digital services. If you're banked with a credit union, I don't have to pay for my bank account. A lot of people take that for granted in the UK. I know it's a problem with the banking model generally in the UK, and not necessarily something that happens in other jurisdictions. But clearly, if I want a bank account with one of your credit unions, I'm paying a monthly fee to have the account, I'm paying my membership fee to be a member of the credit union, and I'm one of the people who has the least money available to make those payments. I wanted to ask firstly whether you thought there were any wider things we could do as a council or more broadly structurally as a society to try and reduce these barriers which put poorer people at a disadvantage disproportionate. If anything, they should be advantaged, but they're in a worse position as a result of their vulnerability. And secondly, specifically on credit unions, what is your sort of customer acquisition cost? If I came to you and I say I want to set up a bank account with you because I want to save, how much does that cost you to have me as a bank account customer, A, to take me on, do your KYC and all of that, and then B, your annual administration costs? Because I think if you could identify people in Breckland who are unbanked and you could find a way of covering, and this is, I'll make the obligatory points about council budget shortly, but if you could cover the cost of maintaining a bank account for vulnerable people who are unbanked, I think that would be a huge step forward for a lot of them in terms of getting them access to some of the mainstream services that we take for granted every day. So I'd just be interested in those views.
I'm not sure that's something I can give you a figure on.
Sure.
Here, but I could probably write to you afterwards with some kind of estimate of what that would be. I would just say that there have been some innovative efforts in this space. We are on our third pay-as-you-go card solution as a credit union. The second one had a very attractive feature, which was that it had no penalty charges for failed direct debits. And that was because the people that designed it were very much mindful of the fact that the likely client group were sorts of individuals who were at risk through chaotic financial lifestyles of incurring those charges, which can be significant. Unfortunately, they folded for various regulatory reasons that involve some shenanigans in Germany, but that's another story that would take far too long. But that just, I think, shows that as a sector we're aware of those, painfully aware of those issues, and very much mindful of them. I mentioned that my credit union's just declared a profit for the second year running. One of our objectives is to think about whether we can reduce our membership charge. There is some value in having a membership charge anyway, but we've had a debate with our members and our volunteers ever since we felt obliged to introduce it, about whether that was something we wanted to do a long term or whether that was a short. So it's a very live topic.
Thank you very much. Harry.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And it's partly picking up the remarks of Councillor Ambush, who's done a lot of sterling work over the years at Durham Town Council, the CAB, but also what Councillor Burt was talking about, the budget, I know which you've alluded to. In terms of agility, I mean, I refer to some of the things I've seen in some councils where they've got like a sort of logarithm and like a little map like snakes and ladders and how you approach things. It may be useful to have something like potentially an all-encompassing video or different graphical presentations rather than just simply text-based and links. So you've actually got something where someone is actually talking to the screen. It may help some people who are disadvantaged in visual ways. The other thing is thinking about the budget, looking at one of the sites I looked at, local authority sites, was Stevenage. So I think in terms of the structure of the budget is where they have a differentiation between people who are under £30,000 income and over, where they decided they're going to dedicate their budget around insulation and other help on energy costs. They've also got a good way of laying things out. I mean, so Norwich City Council, I think Great Yarmouth. So there are some quick wins we can do about how we can make sure people are getting the information out there and it's accessible. And then there's what we do in behind the badge with the content. So I would urge Councillor Webb to which I'm happy to support her with, ask officers to look at some, horizon scanning and feasibility so we can work constructively and, take note of any opposition ideas as well before we get to budget setting and everything is set in stone from, unless there's an emergency from, April onwards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Roger.
And I just want to emphasise, I haven't for a minute suggested that credit unions are the great panacea that's going to solve poverty. The idea of the motion originally was predominantly around providing a good quality option for those residents who need access to a bank account. Yes, they would probably need to save, but they can also access loans that they probably wouldn't be able to access anywhere else, particularly things like these child benefit loans, so that somebody can get their child benefit paid into the account, and once they do that, then they can access a loan subject to all the checks, etc. But I was quite interested to hear what the gentleman over there said about that there is evidence of loan shark and those type of things going on in Norfolk and in Breckland, I think you said. And part of the motion originally that I put forward, I don't want to bore you by reading it out, but was very much around, I don't think, I mean, I've asked people in my own community, what do you know about credit unions? And they say, what? Never heard of it. And the whole idea of the motion really was to raise the profile of it as a very useful, safe tool for some of our residents who can't access services elsewhere safely, rather than going down the route and getting themselves into trouble with unscrupulous lenders. That was an opportunity. And I think the credit unions is a really good way of doing that. I think you've raised an excellent point about the membership fee. That's something I think probably I would ask Councillor Webb to go away and think about, purely because if we've got residents who could probably access that support and that puts them off, whether something through our household support fund or something could pay the membership fee for the first year or two, because it actually is a very small amount of money in the big scheme of things if they can access the wider help. So that was what I was trying to do with the original motion. And I've just read that again, apart from number 6, where I've said, could we have 10 grand to promote the credit unions? And Alison would probably balk at that at the moment. But the other things in there, I think what I've suggested, things like we have a mobile food bus that goes around the district. There's absolutely no reason why we as a council, with our resources, can raise the profile of credit unions generally. We can't promote one individual one, but we could raise the issue of what credit unions do and put that kind of information on the mobile food bus. We could do that and put that on our website as another link. There must be an association so they can look at credit unions and raise that profile as another useful tool. But it is certainly not something that is going to help CAB, I think, with their overwhelming issues at the moment. One thing that's come out today, and I first heard about this, and Steve James, I've had this conversation with him, so it's not something new to him. I first heard about a health and wellbeing partnership by a tweet that Steve put out one evening about he'd had a great meeting, a health and wellbeing partnership. And I thought, health and wellbeing partnership, why don't I know about that? And as a councillor, Steve has since sat me down and sort of talked about the broad what the thing does. But to me, I don't think as a councillor, and I'll be interested to hear what other councillors say, I'm sure cabinet members do, but backbenchers and opposition members like myself, what is this health and wellbeing partnership there to do? What are its objectives? Who actually forms the partnership? I think is probably something that would be really beneficial if we could have a presentation at a future overview and scrutiny meeting to actually educate all members as to that work. Because again, it comes out of this, links in with our Inspiring Communities budget, and we're always hearing about it. We're spending £1 million on Inspiring Communities, and that's great. But I would like to be better educated. I'm sure everybody else would. Was what is the health and wellbeing partnership? Who's involved? What are the objectives in the first year 1, year 2, year 3? So we can understand that, Because then I think we need to understand that before we do the budget setting early next year, because it might be something that when we know the outcomes of that and the conversations we've had today, we can all feed in to actually say, look, we've got a particular problem at the moment with the fuel crisis, etc., and how we're going to help that. So my plea would be, and I'm grateful to Steve because he did give me half an hour to sort of run through the basics of it, but I really do think that as members, it would be beneficial, and I think probably to the wider public, to know what this thing is, who's involved. The gentleman over there said, I think there's a concern that might be a talking shop, and I'm sure that's not the case, but what are those objectives? So I think that's, for me, I'd like a future OSC to do a briefing on that, if possible, please, through you, Chairman. Thank you.
Very good. I'll go to the CAB first, then I'll come to you, then I'll go back to members.
Key takeaways really of what, thank you, Mark, of what we could do to support vulnerable people. We really appreciate Councillor Webb's discussion around debt and working with CRB on that, but we do have to be aware that kind of income isn't, the income that people are receiving aren't actually going to pay off the debt, so it's not actually debt work, it's income maximisation. And it's our specialist knowledge in that which will support people to kind of be able to put food on the table, as it were, as opposed to pay some of those bills that are there. So just to be aware that you're talking about the most vulnerable people in society who can't afford to live, and so how we can support that. But there are some takeaways in terms of energy, which Caroline could say, take the simple things that we could put in place for vulnerable people as well.
Yeah, I guess in terms of what we're able to do as well is, you talked about the household support fund being limited. We would apply for all of the funds as many as someone was eligible for. So, if they've exhausted one thing, we would look at going to their energy company, getting support through that way. And obviously there are schemes available such as the eco, which is quite hard to navigate. There's a lot of stuff at the moment, particularly around energy scams. I don't know how many you've had calls or texts offering you all sorts of things, but energy is one of those areas. People are often being called and said, the council are doing free installation. Do you want to sign up? And navigating those things can be really difficult. The housing is another area. We could look at, as I said, some of our clients are very unwilling to maybe discuss issues with their current landlord. But if they felt there was a way we could feed back confidentially around some of those issues, as we do with National Citizens Advice on a lot of these issues, I think that's a way of moving forward, particularly where properties are incredible. You could have a limit on the cap of what a property is paying per kilowatt, but if they're running on electric heaters that aren't storage heaters and they're on the wrong tariff, and if it's just not adequate to heat that property, then fuel poverty is never going to go away. I would like to say though as well, Amy's point around the delays in seeing people. We are fortunate, we do have project funding for certain areas, including currently for energy, and we are able to try and see people as soon as possible. But obviously for the non-urgent cases, it's, when people are being pushed back, and obviously the fact we are seeing people face to face, that is still quite limited. So where possible, we do try and support people by phone and via the internet, and it may be including using things like Language Line to do that with customers. But obviously the health aspect is incredibly important. We do see a lot of people where their situation is obviously made worse by the fact they need to be in a warmer home because of their health conditions. That may mean they can access extra support, but it just adds to our concerns around fuel poverty and the longer term impacts of living in a cold home.
Having just been invited onto the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, I'm keen to make sure the minutes don't suggest that I think it is a talking shop. I just would I would just stress the importance of it. And if members aren't aware, I think it's a great opportunity for you to become aware of what that tool could do for Breckland, as it could do for the other districts, but they're all developing at different pace in different ways. So you could shape it in whichever way you wish. It has a number of key voluntary groups on there and charities, but it also has all the council services. It has health, social care, public health coming together for really, I think, the first time to include VCSE in that way. The opportunity would be data-led for the first time, and that could be hugely valuable. But it also allows us to draw in particularly NHS and health colleagues to understand community challenges, and they have huge sums of money behind them. And I would counsel Breckland in the same ways we did in Great Yarmouth, saying we need to try and draw attention and resource and agency towards communities to build resilient community groups, rather than continually worry about acute and urgent, which is in a complete disaster, admittedly, but we have to get back to source and try and build healthier communities as well. And I think those HWPs could be part of the solution. So yeah, I'd recommend you look into it. Thank you.
And John.
I'd just like to point out that Norwich does have a Helping Hands Fund. It's made up of donations from grants and by its members, and they disperse very cheap loans at 6% per annum for emergency use. We like to keep it quiet because the first iteration was absolutely fleeced within weeks. And so we started again, but this time on a very softly need to know basis. If Alison wants to direct funds to the Helping Hands Fund, then they can contact me. And we can disperse it presumably to Breckland residents, so the postcodes could apply. The other thing I suppose I'd really like to apologise for is to the Charles Burrell Centre, because they invited me to set up a collection point, which we were unable to do. I just didn't have the volunteers. I still don't have the volunteers. I think we're all in the same boat there. And training, volunteers and training, it seems to crop up an awful lot. So I'm sorry to the Charles Burrell Centre, because we'd like to be there, but we can't be. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Mike, I've then got Alison, I've got Linda, then I've got Peter. And I'm conscious of the time, so members should start considering their final contributions. So, when do you need to leave by? Very good. We've got 10 minutes left of our SMEs, so let's make use of them. Mike, go ahead.
I'm in support of Roger in that we really need to highlight credit unions. Within the past 48 hours, HSBC have actually announced the closure of 196 branches coming on and what have you. This will further reduce people's access to regulated banking and taking it on from that. The other thing is in terms of fuel poverty. At the moment, the hardship fund runs at £300. That wouldn't even get you the minimum delivery of 500 litres. So there is something which we could look at, possibly assisting. There is an organisation called Air for Affinity, Thinking Fuel, who run essentially parish councils, town councils can actually form a fuel club, which residents can then sign up to. And they were doing deliveries. You put your order in on the 1st of the month or the 15th of the month, etc. It's something I think we could look at to supporting as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Alison.
Right, thank you. I've got quite a few bits here, but I'll try and go fairly quickly. Right, the Household Support Fund has clear guidance, and I've got this because I've checked it out, on what it can be spent for. So we can't just take money out of it. It's given to us from Norfolk County Council to be spent on the lower tier council with additional criteria. It's got to be to support vulnerable residents in financial hardship by the way of a direct debit subject to application approval. Right. So that means that before, when we had the round before, we were allowing people to self-refer. you as councillors can, you know your organisations. I've referred about 5. I know Roger has, and I know some others of you have, but look at what's out there and get people to talk to you and say they need help. This is the way to get them the £300. And all right, £300 might be not a lot to some people, but it is a lot to others. So please, I encourage that completely. I want to talk about the Health and Wellbeing Partnership, and I chair that, and I don't want it to be a talking meeting, thank you. It was formed earlier this year. There was a briefing given to Cabinet a month ago, and I think it would be helpful if a briefing was sent out to all members following this meeting, and if there's still any other questions, then fair enough, you know, I'm quite happy to answer whatever is needed. It's been successful. There's been Public Health, Norfolk and Waveney Integrated Care Board, voluntary and charity sector organisations, adults and children's social care, and the Mid Norfolk Primary Care Network. Now, a lot of these organisations have money, and we can use our requirements to go into that money and try and get work done in Breckland for our residents. And this is what we're doing on this side of things. We've already awarded £324,100 from the Norfolk COVID Recovery Fund in priorities such as health inequalities, mental health, alcohol, and prevention of cardiovascular disease. This is all led by evidence that this is where we need it in across Breckland. It's not just, oh, I think we'll give it here and we'll give it here. It's evidence-led and driven. So I think it would be really useful if I did a one-page overview or something just to all members so everybody knows where we are. At the moment, the next stage is what are we going to do next? So it's a good time to tell you all about what we're doing next to get ideas in. Finally, I'd just like to say what we have done, and no, we haven't been slow in doing this. We've been the first council to set up a food bus with all the information for our residents to actually get help when they need it. It's very, very popular. I know it is. And we've had more requirements to visit villages than we've ever had before. So that's it. We've funded the creation of the Borough Supermarket. We've looked at working at partnership to open more food hubs for our community across Breckland. So I believe, as I said, we are being feet of foot. Yes, perhaps we could do some things a little bit better, but I believe, as I said, we are doing everything we can to support our community. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on a number of issues that people have raised, but very briefly, but particularly to our friends who visited us today. You've got councillors here who are the key links to your community. So those of us that are involved with community hotspots, which I am, we've linked that in now with the food bus visiting. So on that Wednesday morning in Shipton, people can come to us for advice and signposting to guys like yourselves. That's what we do. We found with the community hotspots, because that's a very informal coming together for a cup of tea and a chat, people are more likely to open up than in a formal situation. It takes time to get going, but it's working. And we're just delighted that from Shipton, we're even on the Diocese of Norwich Advent calendar this year, promoting the food bus. It's getting that message out there. Those of us that are fortunate enough to be on parish councils, so we do a monthly briefing, including financial help, signposting. Those of us that have monthly newsletters, etc. So we're doing what we can, guys, aren't we? We could do more. Just tell us what you need and we'll get it out there for you. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think now's a good time to let our guests leave. Just before, Peter, I didn't write your name. Sorry, I'm going to let Peter speak first. I know, I always do this. It's so unreasonable. Go, Peter.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got to say, Roger and colleagues over there put a lot of good points forward, because when I originally heard the motion, I thought, oh no, we can't direct somebody to a loan credit bank to add to their debt. And the lady behind me, Caroline, I think has answered all the questions. We need to be putting funding towards helping and seeing why they're in debt and helping with that, not adding to it. There is some great things from the credit union though, where the banking thing, and if people are able to do that, then I think that's a great point. of credit unions. And I might ask at this point, a question, Chairman, you'd be surprised. Would the credit unions think about working with CAB? Would they finance some of their help? You know, we all seem to be working in silos. We've got this fund, we've got that fund. We need to bring it all together. I think probably some of the Inspiring Communities Fund probably could go to the hardship fund. You know, if it's going to go to help with fuel crisis rather than a community centres asking for Inspiring Communities Fund for new tables and chairs, for instance, you know, that £5 might go somewhere else. It's something that we need to look at. This has opened a big discussion today, as far as I'm concerned, and CAB at the point of it. At the
Could you
sharp end.
move us down very quickly, and then we'll let them go because they're trapped. They're trapped here. Thank you, Peter. Can I get? Would you mind commenting on Peter's question? Then I'm going to quickly ask my question, and I'm going to let Roger ask his question, and then I promise we're going to let you leave.
Well, I think it was aimed primarily at credit unions. So, not want to set the credit unions up, but so I was saying before, collaboration and innovation and relationships is important. So there are ways that we can work together. There are lines that we have to draw in terms of governance, decision making, advice, obviously. But the more that we're in the same space, giving holistic support to people, the better. The more that we're seeing weakness in one particular service, perhaps like a credit union, around education, financial education or support mechanisms, and those organizations easily being referred to us is critical. There are mechanisms for that. So the more that we can get together and talk about that, I think the better. And again, Health and Wellbeing Partnership is a good forum for that kind of thing, where it could set up those sorts of events. So we're open to it. And I'll pass across the colleagues to see how they feel.
David.
Councils do work with credit unions a lot. In specific case, Harlow Council's Homeless Prevention Fund is administered by Harlow Credit Union. Harlow Credit Union also work with Harlow Advice Centre with a project called Smart Advice to help people with financial education, etc. So this does happen.
Thank you. Chris?
My credit unions had partnerships on and off with CABs over the years, and I think it is one of those kind of capacity issues. You know, at the end of the day, there are only 6 people in my organisation and 7 volunteer directors, so it's a struggle. But I just wanted to answer the previous councillor's point as well. In an attempt to leave, I'm going to leave you some leaflets about our credit union, which if anyone wants to take them away and use them as they feel fit, then please do. For people who want to be agnostic about which credit union, there is a website called findyourcreditunion.co.uk, and I would recommend, if you want to make a note of that, if anything comes up, to refer people to that, and then it will give, they can put in their postcode and they'll get pointed to the right one.
Thank you very much. So very quickly, my question, you mentioned earlier that you have lots of data and that you might be prepared to come back and speak to us next year to give a sort of deep dive into that. It's not something this committee's yet considered, because obviously we'll get on to what will come out of this very, very useful discussion. But we look quarterly at key performance indicators for the council. You have a window into some parts of our residents' lives, which would be extremely useful, I think, for the council to be aware of, in terms of, you know, are you seeing more indebtedness? Where are your pressure points? That sort of thing. And this isn't something you have to answer now, but if we were to ask you, would you be prepared, I don't know, on a 6-monthly basis or something like that, to send us a snapshot of data saying, you know, things in Breckland are getting worse, or things in Breckland are getting better, this is where it's getting better, this is where it's getting worse. Is that something that might be possible / of interest? And again, I caveat, you may want to go away and think about that before you commit your organisation.
No, it's fine. You get the data. We have one of the best data sets in the charity sector. We can go down to house level. We have a longitudinal data set, so we can see decline in individuals and contributory factors. The only thing I would say is if you ask us to talk about specific postcodes, the numbers become quite small. In terms of trend analysis, we can bring in national data. We have access to the rest of the country's data as well. So trends and issues, we've got incredibly fine data. I think we just need some clear questions. And in terms of reporting, we're due to send you a quarterly report generally, but I think we'd love to get into the grass really and get weeds and figure out sort of more specific questions that might relate to your particular strategy.
Thank you. Roger, very quickly, then we'll let our SMEs leave.
Yeah, it's just very quickly to say to CAB, if you have got somebody that's in need, please do ask them to consider speaking, or you speak to the local parish or town council. I don't know about the town councils and what they do, but certainly the larger parishes like mine at Swanton Morley, we now budget for a hardship fund. So anybody who's a Swanton Morley resident, we get contacted and we can help them. But I also tried to link in my patch, lots of villages have got their own village charities that can give money as well. So I'll just say that that's another avenue. Perhaps we needed a bit of work and give a lot of these parishes and towns a bit of a kick. And if they all put a little bit in the budget, that might help, because small amounts can do quite a lot of good. So that's just another avenue what I wanted to express. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this juncture, a huge thank you to you all for coming along. Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else who needs to leave for 12, I know there were a couple of people, please do take this opportunity. And I think we might have a 5-minute recess and then reconvene to further discuss this item and come up with some outcomes.